it's Jill Reynolds with the Connection Show. Welcome to today's show. Joining me today from Branson, Missouri is Larry Ballard. Welcome, Larry, to the show.
Thank you.
Well, it's so great to have you on. And before we begin, we'd love for you to just hear a little bit about the Connection Show from our intro, and then a word about this amazing event that we're doing. The Connection Show really believes in connecting with people from all over the globe. So we've started a travel to connect part of our business where anybody that wants to get away, but they hate traveling alone, can come with. So we're going to Aruba. The video is going to talk about the dates being February 5th through the 11th, but we're going to be there from the 5th through the 14th. So you could choose to come for 5 nights, 6 nights, or 7, and we hope you'll join us. So stay tuned, Larry. We'll be right back. You don't want to miss a word of what Larry's going to share about his amazing life. One moment, please.
The Connection Show. Inspiring hope, health, healing. Connecting the dots of your story and transforming your life. Sponsored by BraveHeart Workshops, live with Jill Reynolds.
Join us for the Hope, Health, and Healing Aruba Connections Getaway for men and women, February 5th through the 11th, 2023. Are you overworked? Stressed out? Feeling exhausted? Is it time to spoil yourself? Breathe in life and relax at private villas in Aruba for 6 nights and 7 days. Renew your mind and body. Discover greater self-awareness. Join in connection, wellness, stillness, movement, enhance inner peace. Experience amazing beaches. Enjoy snorkeling, area attractions, shopping till you drop. Dine at fabulous beachfront restaurants. Imagine releasing anxiety, reconnect with yourself, restore your soul, bring your friends, enjoy fresh and savory cooked meals, lasting memories. Join us now. Register today. Book your flight and get away to Aruba, February 5th through the 11th, 2023. Register by going to Braveheartworkshops.com. Pack now and see you on the island of Aruba. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get away into 82-degree weather. So if you'd like to join us, please go to our website, braveheartworkshops.com. Please ignore the pricing on there because we have some special rates for you right now for the different dates. So reach out to me at braveheartworkshops.com. So Larry, we'd love the audience to know a little bit about you. So if you wouldn't mind, take us on a journey back into your childhood with little Larry growing up and share with us where you grew up, what home life was like, and then take us through maybe junior high, high school, and on to who you are today.
Jill, like you said, this is different. Every other interview that I've done, they've started with today and why I wrote the book that I wrote. But we'll go back. My childhood was interesting, and you might call it problematic. I was born in Hannibal, Missouri. I was really raised most of my life in St. Louis, Missouri, to an extremely dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic and quite abusive. I actually slept most of my life with a baseball bat under my bed. I don't need to say any more than that. My mother was beautiful. She was absolutely gorgeous. She looked a little bit like Loretta Young. and she had aspirations of being a model. So where did the dysfunctionality come in? My father was a genius. He had an IQ of 165, but he was a very frustrated man. He had been in World War II and came back and didn't go to college. He had an opportunity to, but his father talked him into going into business with him, and then he went into construction. And he was probably the most educated, smartest man that worked for the companies that he worked for. He was an iron worker working, building skyscrapers. So at any rate, that made him extremely unhappy and frustrated, and it made him turn to alcohol. And he took his dysfunctionality out on us. So Jill wanted me to go into detail, so I'll tell you a couple of stories that I think will shock you. Our ritual was every Friday or Saturday night, he'd come home from work, his paycheck was cashed, he would give us $30 for groceries. Now that doesn't sound like much, but that buy a great big cart of groceries back in those days. But how we got the money was that he tore it up in little pieces and strewed it all over the table and the floor. And we had to pick it up and tape it back together before we could go to the grocery store. So life was a little tumultuous. But little did I know that everything that happens to you in life that seems tumultuous is actually, if you believe in God, to groom you for something better in the future. So what that was teaching me was that, well, go back to my mother. She was beautiful, she was loving, but she was basically a manic depressive. So what I did is, as I got older and I was in high school, I was a very outgoing guy. I was a jock. I was on the wrestling team. I was unique in that I had a bunch of friends in all strata, because my life had prepared me to be able to interface with people from every strata. We lived in the ghetto when I was a kid. I was one of two whites in an all-black school, and probably one of the only people, maybe the only person you'll ever meet who was a white person who was bused from the inner city to the suburbs. And when I got off the bus, every single solitary day, there were 6 little white guys waiting there to spit on me and call me poor white trash. But back in the ghetto, the black guys were my friends. So what was I learning? I was learning what they teach you on the radio and on the television about racial discrimination is bunk. I would have actually been dead at one point if it weren't for my black friends. Now, when you live in the ghetto, you're solicited at some point in time to join a gang. And the white gang that was in the general vicinity solicited me, and I said no. So they had backed me down into a dead-end alley and had gone past a trash dumpster and broken some beer bottles and were coming at me. And at that precise moment, half a dozen of my larger, bigger black friends came strolling down the way, and they broke it up, and it was just like a West Side Story. So I basically concluded that I might have either been seriously injured or killed had it not been for those people. So I don't have a bone of prejudice in my body. If I have anything that I'm prejudiced against, it's people who don't try to do better for themselves. So at any rate, that was my early childhood, and that allowed.
So let me ask you: Did you join the black gang then?
No, it was the white guys that wanted me to join a gang.
Right.
The black guys didn't have a gang.
Oh, okay.
So I never joined a gang at all. Okay. So I was gang free. So, and I had, these guys were all 3, 4, 5 years older than me. I had a whole group of black guys that were my protectors, if you will. So, life was good in that regard. Mm-hmm. So moving on, I guess we'll go to where I started high school. And because of that experience.
Well, before you move on, then let me just ask a question. So up until this point, I'm assuming your father was beating on your mom and beating on you guys too as well. So at any point, and you can tell me if it happened in high school, did mom leave dad? Or let's go to high school if she didn't yet?
Oh, I guess I left out a really important part of my story. Thank you. Well, she left several times. But she had no education, and so she'd run back to her mother's. We'd stay at her mother's, which she had a little 3-room duplex, and I would sleep out on the porch. And it was in Hannibal, Missouri, and in the winter it would get down to below 0. There was no heat out there, so I slept out there in what they called an old down mattress. with layers and layers and layers of covers on me. And it was so cold that if you took a glass of water out and put it by the bed at night, it would be frozen in the morning when you woke up. So that's what we lived in. There was one bedroom for all four of us, I should say. And it was challenging, to say the least. But the real challenge came with living with my grandmother. So every once in a while, my mother would give up and she'd go back to my father. So we'd stay 2 or 3 years at a time, go back to my father, come back, stay 2 or 3 years at a time. But my grandmother was a devout Christian, but she was a holy roller Christian. And what she'd do is drag me to church every Sunday, set me on the front pew, and then whisper in my ear, "You are the spawn of the devil. You have bad blood in you. You're going to hell," because she perceived my father, the abusive alcoholic, compulsive gambler, to have contaminated my blood. So all I ever got from my grandmother was shame and ridicule. And little did I know, again, that was teaching me something that was very, very important. It was teaching me forgiveness, because at one point in time, I had to forgive her. And actually, I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to tell you a supernatural story. Now, this may shock people. You may not believe it. I'm going to jump past high school, and I'm in my early 20s, and I have a side venue. I'm selling antiques at flea markets. And I leave my booth, and I go to get some food. I'm walking by, and there's a hawker standing there doing caricatures of people. And he calls and says, "I got to draw your picture." I said, "No, I'm not interested." He chases me down the road, grabs me by the arm and says, "You understand, I have to draw your picture." I said, "I'm not interested." He says, "It's free." I said, "Okay, you got me, draw it." So he handed me the picture afterwards, and it blew my mind. I don't profess that I understand what happened, but it sort of was the first thing that put me on the path towards spirituality. He handed me a picture. It wasn't me at all. And if you guys probably are familiar with the famous picture of an old lady with her hair in a bun and an old man with coveralls on with a pitchfork in his hand, that's what he handed me. That was the identical caricature of my grandmother and grandfather. And he says, "God says, these are your guardian angels." And I just chuckled. I said, so two of the most mean people I've ever encountered in my life that absolutely beat me down are now what? My guardian angels. So I had to laugh. And anyway, if I'm going to move forward then to where I went into high school. And high school was probably the happiest time of my life. I got along with all the hoods because I was a pretty tough guy, having been raised in the ghetto. I could hold my own against anybody because you had to survive. So how I got adopted by the black guys, I was on the wrestling team. I was the varsity wrestling team. And the head of one of the gangs in the school decided that it'd be cool if he could beat the crap out of me. So he jumped me, had all his friends around watching. Well, the problem was you don't take a wrestler on if you're a boxer, because if you get him on the ground, he's done. And that's what happened. And after that, it was funny. They loved me. Him and all of his hoodlum friends loved me. Girl down the street was cheerleader. She was in honors, and she was my best friend. And because of her, everybody in the number one clique levitated to me. And then since I was a jock, I had all the jock friends. So basically, I was probably the only kid I knew of in school that could cross between all the cliques in the school. And so that gave me a lot of confidence. Now we'll move forward to where my life made its irreparable change. Unless you want to redirect me, I'll move into after I graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So then the event that drew all of those things together, that made me the person that I've become, happened. I was in college. I was a freshman, and it was 1968. And I had some time between classes. I had a motorcycle and went for a ride up in the Ozark Mountains, and I rounded a curve, and they had dropped oil and gravel on the road and did not put out a sign. I hit that gravel, went down, and I happened to go over a cliff. And my motorcycle went airborne and landed in a pine tree that was growing up out of the edge of the cliff. I hit a tree head on and was knocked unconscious. I was down deep in the ditch. They couldn't see me. I was there for 4 hours unconscious. I could feel my spirit leave my soul, leave my body, and I went to heaven. I was not dead. If a person dies, all accounts that I've read is you cross over the barrier and you see all kinds of things in heaven. I went so far, I felt absolutely at peace. It was the most angelic feeling I've ever had in my life. But eventually I came to a screeching halt at what I'd call a fog wall, and all I saw was a silhouette. No words, just telepathic communication. And what it was basically doing was giving me the directions for the rest of my life. Everything that you've encountered has happened to you in order to prepare you for what your assignment is. You're to learn to forgive people. You're learn to find out how to be successful. So what I had learned is I simply at that point said everything that I had been taught by my mother, by my father, by my grandfather, everything I experienced had prepared me perfectly for failure. So what did I do? I decided that I was going to get my own mentors and I was going to change my life. If I knew what it took to be a failure, all I had to do is go to the other end of the spectrum and see what successful people had done. So I read the Bible cover to cover. That was one of the assignments that God gave me as I had that near-death experience. I read the biography of Albert Einstein, of Abraham Lincoln, of Thomas Edison, of Nikola Tesla, and many others. And I was looking for the attributes that made each one of those people successful. Well, most of them had forgive people. Not all, but many of them were religious. Most were spiritual to one degree or another. Probably Lincoln had the one attribute that I acquired that I thought was most important to me. Lincoln said that the things that I have learned in life that were meaningful to me, almost all of them came from my failures. So I was perfectly set to be a failure. So it fit me perfectly. So basically I started to look at the things that had made me fail and look at the opposite of them. So I learned the attribute to never give up. A failure is just an instruction that says, well, you didn't do it exactly right, but try again and try again and try again until you get it right. And so I became doggedly persistent. And I learned that the next thing that I had to learn was I had to learn forgiveness. And then as that walk went on, here's what God showed me how it was going to work. He said, you're going to be used to deliver a message to the world, but it's not going to happen until the world is on the absolute tip of economic and moral collapse. And he said, you'll know when that is because your hair will be salt and pepper and all hell will be breaking out across the earth. So that brings us up to, this general time frame.
And so let's pause for just a moment. I always like to pause to connect the dots. So I'm still on a cliffhanger. So I need to go back for a moment to being on top of that pine tree and 4 hours of unconsciousness and leaving your body per se for heaven and having spiritual awakenings. So how did you get rescued and what was the result of the motorcycle accident? How were you finally rescued?
Well, I regained consciousness with a whole bunch of people standing over me, shaking me, and I had a severe concussion. Basically, one of the people put me in their car and took me to the hospital, and they did the appropriate exams. But basically, all I really had was a concussion, and I had been unconscious for 4 hours. But during that time, I was getting instructions, and the instructions told me what the rest of my life was going to look like.
Okay.
So basically, the first set of instructions says, when you come out, it's going to be a dangerous time. And you're going to feel like you've been passed over, but I'm going to let you know that you haven't been. What's going to happen to you is you're going to have a number of accidents, every one of which should kill you. And you're going to walk away from them absolutely unscathed. So real quickly, here's my list of miracles. I was working in construction, going through high school. I was on the outside of a building, 5 stories up with a safety harness, and it broke. I'm dead. No, I'm not dead. Because my foot caught and I didn't hit the ground. That's an absolute miracle. A few days later, I'm offloading steel at the job, and it should have been the safest thing in the entire project, except for the fact that it was the 1960s and there were miniskirts and it was lunchtime. And the guy who could see the crane operator was looking at the girls and not at me. And he gave the up signal of the crane operator, and 10,000 pounds of steel came swinging at me. I grabbed a hold of the choker, and before that Lindell crane could get to its offload destination, which is about 10 stories up in the air, he saw me at about the 7th floor. He panicked. He threw on the brakes and the choker like this, and I'm holding on by one hand. I thought I was going to fall. When I got back into the ground, I was so shook up. My heart was racing so much that every time the men would stand me up, my knees would give away and I fall on the ground. It took me 10 minutes before I could stand. And then I was in an automobile wreck, and I was a passenger, and I saw it coming. I jumped in the back seat. When we were done, we had ran headlong into a concrete abutment, and the engine was where I had been sitting. I'll just give you two more. There were a lot. I'll just give you two more. If you can see this, there's a scar on my forehead right here. That's where that big artery is. I was kind of a thrill seeker back in those days. I used to cave, among other things. And I had an accident. They took me to the emergency room, and it took 2 hours to get there. Once we got there, they touched this with a swab to clean it. The artery burst in the emergency room. If it had burst in the cave, I'm dead. But another supernatural event happened. Then I'll take you to the very end. I graduated. Here's what happened. I'm on what was then called the Blue Goose, which is, I think, now Northwest Orient, out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm a young businessman. I'm sitting over the wing of the plane, and I hear bam. And I look out, and there's flames. The engine's exploded. They feather the prop. They get the fire out. It's only a two prop, so the plane is listed at about a 20-degree angle. They circle the field. They drop their fuel. All the emergency trucks are out. Pandemonium is going on. People are screaming, crying, yelling. And God says, "You want to graduate?" He said, "Stand up, tell you, and say what I tell you to say." I stood up and I screamed at the top of my lungs. Not one person, not a single person on this plane is going to have one hair of their head harmed. And I sat back down. When the pilot landed, he jerked that plane at the last second. The wing lifted up so that it didn't hit the ground. We bounced down the runway, and we got off. Everybody applauded because they knew they had been part of a supernatural event from God. We all walked away. That was the end of my accidents. But now there's two other parts to the story of what God told me. Basically, he said, well, it's going to be a long journey. Like I said, not until my hair is salt and pepper, not until people's eyes are open will they be ready to hear the message that I have to give you, and not until they're desperate will they be ready to hear the message. So it's going to be a long journey. So he told me all the things I was supposed to read. First of all was history and the Quran. I had to read them both within a year. And now you might ask, well, why would you read the Quran? Well, you've got to know your enemy. So basically you have to read both sides of everything so that you're balanced, so that you know what you're really looking at. And he said, there's a number of things that are going to be pertinent at the end that you may not think so, but you're going to read those things because I'm going to tell you to. So I read psychology, sociology, anthropology. I read physics books. I'm not a mathematician, but I read Einstein and Tesla and so forth. I read about politicians. I read geography. I read climatology. Little did I know we were going to be in the middle of this climate change issue at the time. I read geology because there's some things about the earth and what's happening inside of the earth that people need to know. So huge library, read. And so that prepared me from an intellectual viewpoint. I'd already been prepared to a degree from my background growing up. And then he says, now one of the things going to happen. He says, you're going to change jobs about every 3 years. And I'm going to put you in those jobs. And each and every one of them is going to be strategic and have a purpose for the future that you won't see at the time they happen. So I already kind of alluded to the first one. That was when I fell off that building and never hit the ground. The second one was with the Lindell crane operator. Now, what am I talking about? I got off track. So God told me I was going to change jobs. I'm sorry. So basically, I had the job in construction, and why that was important was because I worked with something called thermite. And when 9/11 came, thermite bombs.
Yeah, so be careful so whatever we talk about, so keep I'd say stay focused on your personal life versus that, because again, YouTube doesn't like anything controversial. So just I'm gonna and then people won't hear your interview.
Okay.
So let's pause on that because I read some of that in your bio, so I got to be very cautious on the show. Okay.
All right. So basically, I worked in construction, and for a reason. I worked for Monsanto for a reason. I worked for Atomic Energy of Canada for a reason. I won't go into what those reasons were. I was under socialized medicine in Canada for a reason that I would learn. I worked for for a firm in France so that I would learn some things that were important geopolitically. And then lastly, I had a patent that took me to China and allowed me to see things that other people don't see because there was something less to learn there. So basically, God had me travel all over the world and work in a number of politically significant or economically significant jobs to prepare me for the message that I had to deliver. So that takes me basically through what I call the preparation period. And why don't I let you redirect me at this point?
So during this period that you were going through all these things, did you ever marry?
Yes, I got married, and it didn't work out too well. Basically,
When did you
I
marry?
was
How old were you when you got married?
in my early 30s,
Okay. And did you have
and
any children? Do you have any children?
I have two children,
Okay.
but not by that marriage. I was married a second time, and that was a out and out mistake. Basically, what had happened is while I was in high school, my father left,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother couldn't hold a job. And so I started working, even going through high school. And right after I graduated, we got notice that we had to move. We had never owned a home. We were living in a duplex.
And this
Well,
and was this you and your mother? Did you have any siblings?
I had a sister who's a half sister. She was 6 years older than me, and she was now teaching at the University of Columbia, and she was going through a major life crisis. She had met a gentleman that she was going to marry. He was a general in the Greek army, and they had a coup in Greece. And at any rate, she decided that it was too politically upheaving to go over there. So I left her out of what had happened, and I decided to take over financial responsibility for both myself and my mother. That's how I happened to be working in construction so I could make some real money. And so I was trapped in a situation where I now was the economic provider for my mother. And that kept me in college for a long time. I'd go to school, I'd run out of money, I'd go to school, I'd run out of money. It took me 8 years to finish school. And I felt as if I was never going to get out of living at home with my mother. So the mistake that I made is I met a woman that worked for the same company I did. We were out on the road and we'd meet here and there in the next place. And I said, this is my chance. I was basically running away. So I got married to get away, to get some independence. And this is going to sound incredible, but I had never been to her place of residence. We'd only seen each other out on the road. Well, when I got married, I found she was a lovely lady. She was very outgoing, very cheerful, very much fun to be around. But she had an attribute that I just couldn't handle. She was ostensibly the dirtiest person I'd ever seen in my life. When I would come back from a business trip, she had a dog, and there would be dog turds all over the house. She wouldn't have picked them up. I'd have turned the lights on and get a dustpan and pick them up before I could go in the house. Never in our 10-year marriage was there a plate that was washed, or a meal that was cooked, or a dish that was, or a piece of clothing that was cleaned. And I finally got to where I couldn't handle it. We went to counseling. And then, long story short, I had told her, I'll stay with you for the rest of your life. I love you, but I'm not going to have kids by you because I had a very bad childhood. And if I can't give my children the right environment, I just won't have them. And so the marriage ended abruptly when in the 10th year we were driving down the road and her purse flew open and her package of birth control pills fell out on the floor, and it was the end of the month and not one pill was taken. So she had decided upon her own that she was going to get pregnant and I was going to be a father, and I didn't have anything to say about it. So that ended that marriage abruptly because the one thing that I had requested had been breached. And several years went by and I got married again. And again, I was very foolish. Now I'm 40. I have no kids. I'm desperate again. I want to have children. And I met a woman at work. And the bottom line is that she was the exact opposite of the woman that I had married. She was a neat freak. She was very intelligent, but she was cold. And I thought, well, she'll warm up, later. Well, she never did. And I'll jump all the way to the end of that marriage, which was 22 years long. And finally, the parting words from her was, "You fool, don't you realize that I don't like men at all? That the only reason I ever married you is because my biologic clock was ticking." And bam, that was it. That was over. But I got two beautiful sons. I'm closer to one than I am the other. And the one I groomed, he allowed me to groom him. I took him every place I went, and we went to revivals, and I think he's groomed to, at some point in the future, go into evangelism. And if there's anything that I'm proud of in my life, it's that I broke the chain that happened in my life. My sons are very different than I am. They had a very good upbringing. They had financial stability. They had anything they could want economically. They had love, and they're well balanced. And so I broke that chain that had plagued me, and probably plagued my family for generations. Mm-hmm. So that brought me to literally where we are right now. So I'll stop again, and I'll allow you to take me where you want to take me next.
Well, what I'd like to do at this point is to bring up your bio. So this is Larry's bio to give you a little bit more background, and his website, which is larryballard.com. And on this, we'll end with just a couple more minutes left with sharing with you that Larry's journey now has led him to write a book. So talk about how God's prepared, with everything that God prepared you to, he prepared you to write a book. And share with us the name of your book.
Okay. The book is called Liberty Crusade, The Fight to Save the Free World. And like so many other things in my life, it has a story too. I submitted it to every major publisher in the country. And many of them didn't even respond, but the ones who did, there was a consistent theme. Rejected, 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 rejected. So basically, Harrison House had sent me a rejection letter, but 2 months later, I got a phone call, and I was confused. Well, they've already rejected me. Why are they calling me? Well, there's this lady on the phone, and she says, "Mr. Ballard, did you get that book published?" She says, "Oh, wait a minute, don't answer." She said, "I'm going to answer for you. You didn't get it published because you hit the nail on the head, and they're not going to let this book get published." She said, "But I'm leaving Harrison House, and with the things that I've learned, I'm going to open a small publishing firm. I happen to have a small chain of Christian bookstores. I'm going to be in Fayetteville at one of those stores in a couple of weeks. I'd like to meet you." So I said, "Great." And I went down, and I walked in, and the first thing she did is stand up, and she laughed just like on that telephone, and got a great big smile on her face, and said, "God told me that if I would publish your book for free, that he would bless my venture. And so this book would have never seen the light of day had it not been for someone hearing from the word of the Lord that this was a message that the world needed to hear." And it's on only one source. You can get it off of my website at larryballard.com, which will link you to Amazon, or you can go directly to Amazon. And what it is that's unique about it is God told me that we would be at this time, in a time when there would be some censoring going on. And he said that people who came out with the message that I have, which is political and spiritual, would be censored. So he said, "This is why I had you study history. History, once it occurs, is cast in concrete. So I'm going to give you a number of replicable tipping points that you would share with the people that will make them immune to the lies that they're hearing in the general media, and allow them to see that history repeats itself. So if we find a tipping point in the past that happened and it's repeated, over and over and over again, things related to our wars, things related to the rise and fall of nations, things related to the rise and fall of economies, etc., then if you can teach those things to the people, you'll arm them. And when I got ready to write the book, one of the books that jumped out at me that he said, model it after this book in terms of its structure, The Art of War, because he said people need to know, they need to be made immune to what they're being taught. And in order to do that and to stand up and be empowered so that we can stand up as a nation and say no to the forces of evil, they have to know who the enemy is. They have to know what his agenda is. They have to know how he has executed whatever plan that he has executed. And we have to be able to say, now we're empowered. If we know who he is, if we know what he's done, if we know how he's done it, then we can do the same thing back to him. And so basically the message becomes very simple. They tell us that we can't change anything, that we don't have the power. But the truth is that we came to this nation and founded this nation on a set of 12 principles that are all outlined in our Constitution. And those things have systematically been removed. Our right to private property has been removed. Our right to free speech has been removed, et cetera, et cetera. If we just plug those things back in, plug and play, America becomes once again the nation it was intended to be. It becomes the covenant nation of Abraham here on earth to usher in the Great Awakening, to usher in a period of peace on earth, to usher in the fall of corruption and the rise of freedom. And that's what the book is about.
Wow. So everybody, if you really want to know all of the stuff that Larry said, which I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy. Please go to his website today. Get this book, read it from cover to cover, and I think that you'll find some amazing new information and have your blinders. The one area, and I'm not going to go into it very deeply, that really has affected me personally, Larry, is my husband and I have had DirecTV at our homes for over 20 years when we lived in Chicago and here. And when we learned that DirecTV canceled CBS programming and most recently Newsmax, I've just had it. I've had it that, I pay a premium for a service. We pay $250 a month for premium channels at our home. And to be able to have shows and programming that we're paying for canceled without any say is just gotten to a place for me that I said enough is enough is enough. So how many of you today are out there where you've said enough is enough is enough? Pick up Larry's book and read. Empower yourself and learn what you can do to make a difference in your own life. And so with that, one of the things that I had done, I've kind of been on pause a little bit. I didn't go to Nashville, is I had traveled with the ReAwaken America Tour because they really believe in reawakening America. And so they're only doing a few events in 2023. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and show you. They're going to be going to Miami next. And that one is going to be May 12th and 13th, which happens to be my wedding anniversary. And they'll be at the Trump National Durrell in Miami, Florida. To get tickets, you must go to timetofreeamerica.com. Timetofreeamerica.com. You must follow the directions listed on the screen. You got to text, it says click on the royal blue request tickets, scroll on to the bottom, click on the baby blue request tickets, fill out the tab and submit it. Then text them and someone will call you back. Why is it so hard to register? Well, because they had bots trying to get all their tickets so no one would show up. So they had to do this a special way. When you text them and they call you back, you must mention Braveheart told you about it so you could get 10% off on your tickets. So that's Miami. Then from Miami, they're going to Las Vegas. Las Vegas will be August 25th to the 26th at the Craig Ranch Amphitheater. Again, follow the directions that I said. Make sure you mention Braveheart to get 10% off. If you do not mention it, you will not get the discount. If you text them and no one calls you within the hour, text again. If no one calls you within the hour, text again. If you miss the phone call, you'll be at the back of the queue. So you must wait patiently. Don't give up. But if you'd like to come to the event, I think that you'll learn a whole bunch of new stuff. So Larry, we really are grateful that you came on and shared your story with your heart. We hope everyone that listened today can connect the dots of Larry's story with your own. See the similarities in his life instead of the differences. And we hope by hearing it and seeing how he's overcome things that your life can be transformed. So again, please go on to LarryBallard.com and order that book today. Thanks again, Larry, for joining us on The Connection Show.
Thank you, Jill.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on The Connection Show. We'd appreciate your support. Please go to either our Patreon or our PayPal page to support our show. We love our podcast guests and social media subscribers, so you don't miss any of our shows. Go to our website today at BraveHeartWorkshops.com and our Contact Us page. Click on all our social media links and subscribe to and like all our pages. Our affiliate partners, thank you for your support. Go to our affiliate partners page on our website and order from them today. They're offering discounts when you mention BraveHeart. Click on their website links to order from them today.